So there's always two perspectives when you come from the Super Bowl. There's the winning team and then there's the losing team. And so as we always do here on Mondays is we give credit to the winning team first. So let's start with that. The Eagles, while I know it is popular and a pretty normal storyline to say, once your quarterback wins a Super Bowl, once your head coach wins a Super Bowl, we now throw them into the elite class of coaches that have won Super Bowls, quarterbacks that have won Super Bowls. I'm not going to do that here. I said this a little bit earlier on TikTok. Shout out to my forehead. The story of the Philadelphia Eagles is the overall roster. And who's in charge of that roster? It's Howie Roseman. Now, Brett Veach has gotten a lot of credit over the last couple of years because that is the current dynasty in the NFL, and he has been elevated to the best GM in the sport. I personally don't believe there's been a moment since Howie Roseman's had that job that he hasn't been the best general manager in the sport, and that's why Philadelphia moves differently than other teams do. Again, Nick Sirianni just won a Super Bowl. I could also see Nick Sirianni being fired in 2 years. Well, that's outlandish. How can you say that? He just won a Super Bowl. How did Nick Sirianni get the job? Because Doug Peterson had a bad year a few years removed from winning a Super Bowl. And they didn't care. Eagles moved on because they knew the right guy was already in the building, and that's been their general manager. Jalen Hurts, again. Carson Wentz, who didn't win a Super Bowl, but was an MVP candidate, and some would say the front runner up until missing the last couple of games. Then he gets hurt. Then he has a disappointing season, and they're like, hey, look, we're going to move on. We believe the thing that makes this run, the engine to our train, sits in the general manager's office. And as long as he's here, he's going to be able to get us new players, new talent, personnel decisions. And don't take it from me, most coaches get to hire their own staff. Nick Sirianni didn't hire either of his coordinators, who you could argue are the most important parts of this team. What Vic Fangio did with that defense, what Kellen Moore has done with that offense to Saquon Barkley. Nick Sirianni didn't get to pick his staff. That was Howie Roseman. I've made videos about this before, and I've given Howie his credit of how the amount of talent he's put together on this roster. I think what he's done, what the 49ers have done with John Lynch, and what the Lions have done, those were the three best prior to injury, before anyone got hurt. Those are the three best overall rosters in the league. The Lions dealt with a bunch of injuries, and the 49ers also did. But why I give Howie even credit over those two situations is those two situations, their first time having that amount of talent. Howie has consistently done this with Philadelphia. He's consistently had the Eagles as one of the most talented teams in the NFL. This is nothing new to him, and he will be able to continue to keep stacking talent, adding players, making the right personnel decisions. He's just great at his job. And if you watched that game last night, what position would you say Kansas City was better than Philadelphia? We inherently give them the quarterback, but Hurts outplayed Mahomes. The offensive line, Kansas City has 2 all-pro players. Their line's not better than Philadelphia. On their defensive line, they have Chris Jones. Defensive line wasn't better than Philadelphia's. In the secondary, they have a 2-time all-pro in Trent McDuffie. Philly secondary was better. What part of that game was, from a personnel, player, dude standpoint, were the Chiefs better than the Philadelphia Eagles? The answer is none. Because Howie's built a complete roster, and he's done this multiple times. The Chiefs are top-heavy. Mahomes, Kelsey, Jones, McDuffie. The Eagles have guys everywhere. Defensive line, offensive line, maybe the best set of receivers in the NFL, a good tight end, Saquon Barkley at running back, Zach Bond, who's just had an all-time all-pro season at linebacker, Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, the rookie. Again, think about that. He is so good at his job, even already having most of these guys on defense and having most of these guys on offense, his offseason acquisitions, Zach Bond, all-pro linebacker, 2 rookie corners who had arguably the 2 best seasons by a defensive rookie. You could argue Quinton Mitchell should have been the defensive rookie of the year. I know one to Jared Verse, but he was in that discussion most of the year. And look at just the gameplay from last night. The Kansas City receivers couldn't get away from the Philly corners. These guys were locking them up. The pass rush was there from the defensive line. The offensive line was dominant. Saquon didn't have a great game, but you could tell Kansas City was deliberate on, we are not letting Saquon Barkley beat us. Anyone else can win. He can't beat us this game. And that's how they played. And I don't blame him for that, but that's how it played out because they put so much tension on Saquon. Jalen Hurts, twice in a Super Bowl now, has outplayed Patrick Mahomes. Twice. Yes, he lost one. They just dominated this one. This is what Colin Cowherd always says this. Don't chase money. Money is everywhere. I know that doesn't always feel good to people. We all have our own different financial situations, but money is everywhere. Chase good leadership, chase good management, because they are going to help you extend and prolong your career, and you're going to enjoy doing it with them versus you can make a lot of money and hate who you work for. What the Philadelphia Eagles have done is they have great management, they have great leadership, a bunch of different guys. Guys can go anywhere and get paid. It's the NFL. It's professional sports. Guys can go anywhere and get a bag. Guys can go anywhere and get a $100 million contract. But in Philadelphia is the only place where you're going to have leadership, you're going to have constant additions to the roster that make your team and your life easier. They're going to improve on this. This is the 3rd youngest roster in the NFL. With a guy who has dominated drafts at the head. So, 3rd youngest roster, already all this talent, multiple all-pro guys, great offensive line, great defensive line, and now Howie Roseman gets to go back in the draft and get even more guys to keep improving this team. This is why. Don't chase money, chase good management, chase good leadership. This is going to be a team. Tony and I talked about this before the game even started, and we're like, even if Kansas City were to win, the better situation long term is 1,000% the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's because the guy they have a general manager. So congrats to the Philadelphia Eagles. Super Bowl champs, deserved it, dominated the modern dynasty, the current dynasty in the NFL. Every bit about that game, they were better in every area. They dominated, did what they were supposed to do. Transitioning from that to the losing team, here's what I don't really fear. I'm a Chiefs hater. I'm not going to hide that. But here's the problem for the Chiefs. A real problem. Everybody just believes once you start winning, you're going to keep winning. But that's never really how it works. Most dynasties end a lot quicker than we ever think, which is why the very prolonged ones, Duncan with the Spurs in San Antonio, Brady with New England, and what Kansas City has done over these last 6 years, we admire those because there's all-time great teams that only ever win one, get to one, and then we don't get them back. Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, that first Super Bowl, if you look at that roster talent-wise from top to bottom, and they go back the next year, they should have won. They should have been their own dynasty. 3 out of 4 years, 4 out of 6 years. That team was that talented. That team was that great. It was that stacked. One Super Bowl. The Niners, they have no Super Bowls. And look how great they've been the last several years. And what they've been able to do is get to the Chiefs, get to the Super Bowl, and lose to the Chiefs and Mahomes. All I've heard over the last couple of months is Mahomes is chasing Brady, and if he gets a three-peat, he's going to put a real big dent to the point of you could already argue he's better than Brady. Brady went 10 years in between Super Bowl victories. And I know that sounds outlandish, and how could that ever happen to Mahomes? The reality is it could, because we've seen it happen with the greatest player ever. Because I know we all like to say, oh, well, the Chiefs have already reinvented themselves. The Chiefs have already had to retool. They traded away Tyreek Hill. They've done that. The Chiefs have had 2 really strong draft classes, and then what was left of the first part of their dynasty, Mahomes, Kelsey, Jones. I've been saying it all year. I understand Chris Jones still gets double teamed at a rate where people can say, oh, he's still the best defensive tackle. Look at the best defensive tackle on that field was last night. It wasn't Chris Jones. Who was the best tight end on that field last night? It wasn't Travis Kelce. And we already talked about Hurts has outplayed Mahomes twice now in Super Bowls. The reality for the Chiefs is this does not last forever. And we saw regression to the means. You could say all you want about, oh, they're just practicing, or oh, they're not taking teams seriously enough, or they can't stay focused because they're back-to-back champs and all they're thinking about is getting the third one. We saw true regression to the means of if Kansas City a few years ago was up here and everybody was down here, we are starting to see that gap close. Kansas City's coming down. Other teams are coming up. And the reality is, I know it sounds impossible in the moment. Oh, they're not going to get to the Super Bowl for a handful of years. But the reality is you wouldn't have said Brady after 3 and 4 wasn't going to reach another one for a decade, or wasn't going to reach another one for 5 years, wasn't going to win another one for a decade. The reality is when guys start winning, it's in our imagery that we think, oh, they're going to get another one, and oh, Mahomes is still under 30, and he's about to be 30. But Kelsey's no longer the same player he once was. Chris Jones is no longer the same player he once was. Andy Reid is one of the best play callers in NFL history, maybe the best. But that bag of tricks that he used to pull out every handful of times a season, them doing the ring around the rosy stuff against the Raiders, the super creative, innovative play calls, we're seeing that stuff less and less. Teams are catching up. And why, and I'll end on this, a lot of you have to stop this whole pace conversation. The reason why Brady and Mahomes feels distant to, in my opinion, rational people is because pace does not matter when it comes to Tom Brady. Yes, Mahomes is winning at a faster pace than Brady did. Brady also played until his mid-40s. If Mahomes were to catch Brady, he would have to, at this all-time winning pace, which realistically no one could ever keep up, he'd have to do this again to finish a Super Bowl behind Brady and to tie him or pass him by one in playoff games and playoff wins. Tom Brady was brought up on the broadcast several times last night. He's been to 10 Super Bowls. Mahomes has been to 5. He has 35 playoff wins. Mahomes has 18. Yes, Mahomes is one of the greatest talents, one of the best players we've ever seen. But there's a reason why there's very few things undisputed in sports. Even in basketball, it used to be Michael Jordan forever, but LeBron has entered that conversation. Mahomes hasn't truly entered that conversation when it comes to Tom. And now, and because you got to nitpick when it comes to these all-time greats, 2 Super Bowls that Mahomes has been in, he's lost and lost badly. The one against Tom, and now this one last night against Philadelphia. That will matter when you're comparing who's the greatest, who's the best. And having those 2 on your resume, those are going to sting. Tom's worst loss, 2007 Super Bowl, and it wasn't like they got blown out. They were just undefeated and should have won that game. But Tom was never just blown out in a Super Bowl. Again, he lost those 2, and then he lost the one to Philadelphia where he had 500 yards and didn't punt. So pace doesn't matter when it comes to, are you going to catch Tom Brady? The reality is you're not. And that's fine. I root for a franchise that has, in my opinion, a top 6, 7 quarterback. And at the time of his retirement, people would have told you he was a top 3 guy, top 4 guy. There is no pace when it comes to Brady. He has just stacked more awards than anyone in the history of this game, and I don't see that coming to an end anytime soon because Mahomes and the Chiefs, what does Mahomes look like in a post-Kelsey world? What does Mahomes look like in a post-Chris Jones being the dominant all-pro world? What does he look like in a world where Andy Reid's not clearly by far and away the best play caller in the sport? We're going to start seeing this stuff. It's not just, oh, well, he just doesn't have Tyreek Hill anymore. He's going to get another speedy receiver in his career. He's got one now. Shout out to Xavier Worthy. Played a great game last night. But we're going to actually see what does Mahomes look like in this new, not this generation of the Kansas City Chiefs. And until he proves that, we need to stop on the Brady conversation.